You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. Could the exact same root be behind every fear you have ever experienced? Stay tuned for today's captivating episode. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer. What if everything we've been told about holistic health, healing, and well-being is only part of the story? Because thriving in today's world looks different than it used to. Here, we challenge the narratives, rethink what it means to become human, and explore how that shapes the way we lead, live, and step into our full potential. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Some of what we call our personality, our limits, and our fears was never actually ours to begin with. It was handed to us before we had any say in the matter, and most of us go an entire lifetime without questioning whether it has to stay. Constantin Bogdan Morun is a transformational guide, speaker, and creator of the Clear Activation Method, blending neuroscience, subconscious reprogramming, and embodied awareness to help individuals break free from the patterns that keep them stuck. After years of high performance on the outside but internal struggle with anxiety, burnout, and misalignment, Constantin discovered that true transformation doesn't come from mindset alone, but from working with the deeper layers of the nervous system and subconscious. Through his programs, music, and speaking, Constantin supports individuals in stepping out of survival patterns and into aligned, authentic living, what he calls the journey back to one. Here is my interview with Constantin Bogdan Morun. Hi, Constantin. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you. And I want to say again, because we had a lovely recording for the summit as well. And today we will be talking about our patterns, maybe why we're still feeling stuck, and how all of that comes together. So welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being here today.
Metro, it's a pleasure. And yes, our recording for the summit was fantastic. I can't wait for everyone to enjoy not just our recording, but everything else that you put together. It's just simply fantastic. So if you're listening to this episode right now and you haven't seen the summit yet, you should go check it out.
It's going to be a really amazing community event. And showcasing everyone's work. And as you said before, making sure everyone shines their light so we can get that out into the world. Yeah. And for you today, Constantin, would you like to start us off with maybe a little bit about your story or your journey and the parts of that you feel connect to what you do today? And also let our listeners know what it is that you do today.
Yeah, let's start with the end in mind with what you said, right? What I do or who I am. And over my journey, what I have come to realize is that whatever it is that we have in our life is a direct result, of course, of who we are in that particular moment in life. And that's not groundbreaking. Everyone knows that to some degree. But let me take it a step further. What I've realized in my life is that our, let's call it hardware, which is our body, our brain, has evolved over many years, but it hasn't changed very much, which means that whatever we're working with in today's world is the same thing that we had 1,000 years ago, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, when there was no technology, there was no this insane amount of energy and people around us. It was just, life was a bit simpler. Yes, more difficult, but simpler. So what it means is that our bodies evolved in such a way to keep us safe, to get us to reproduce, so we can keep the human race going. So that means that there's a lot of patterns that we have learned at a subconscious level that drive our behavior before we even realize consciously what's going on. So to bring us full circle then, what is it I do today is very different than even 6 months ago or a few years ago, because I've realized that, wait a second, if we can go after these patterns, which to me are stories that we've stored or we've put together from our experiences in this life or another, depending on your belief system, then if we go after those stories, we see them for what they are, we release them, then all of a sudden, we can allow more of our true self to shine through. And one of the things I like to talk about a lot, and I see this day in and day out with myself and clients and friends that go through this, is that your truest self, your beautiful soul, your light, whatever you came into this world to do, already exists right now in this moment. The challenge is that we have so much clutter on top of it that it's very hard to see it. And these patterns, these stories, these memories are part of that clutter. So the moment we take a step back, we allow it to show us what it is that it wants to show us, and we release it, we get back closer and closer to our own truth. So in other words, I help people in these transition periods from the person they thought they have to be to the person they always knew they could be. And that transition is probably the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Because in a matter of minutes, could be 5, could be 10 minutes, could be half an hour, someone can release a story that's been dominating their life for decades, and they may have not even known that it was. And all of a sudden, it's out of their field, energetic field, and now they can move on in a new direction in life. Because what we know from science is that your nervous system overall and its safety precedes any type of change you want to do. And I've done a lot of mindset work in the past, and I as a coach as well. And what I've realized is that, yes, you can have more discipline, you can push harder, you can fight fire with fire. But what's going to happen is that at some point, you're going to unfortunately take your foot off the gas. Maybe something happens in your life. Maybe a change happens. Maybe you get tired, you get sick. And all of a sudden, those old patterns come back. And the analogy I like to use is we all know that water travels through the path of least resistance. So from the top of the mountain to the ocean, it will always take the path of least resistance. In our brains, the connections we have between all the parts of it that create who we are, don't think of them as rivers or as paths of least resistance. So when you want to change something, neuroscientifically speaking, like through your brain, you create a new path. And then you have to force yourself to take the new path. Every time you remind yourself, you do the work, all of us have gone through that in some way or another. But the old path is still there. And it used to be the path of least resistance, which means that the moment you're not consciously pushing for the new path to make it the path of least resistance, which may take years, maybe it can never happen, depends on the person, it goes back to the old path. And sometimes it goes back 1 out of 4 times, and then 2 out of 4 times, and before you know it, it's back to normal being what felt safe before. So I guess to bring it all together is the idea of how do we create safety in the moment by releasing what's not us. And we'll dive deeper into what it is that it's not us.
Thank you for sharing that. And what an insightful look at our patterns and what goes on, because I feel that a lot of us as humans have gotten very good at portraying something to the outside world. And yet inside we feel very different, and there are very different things going on. So coming back to that inner self, that inner true self or soul, however you want to call that, and actually digging that out from all that clutter that you described, it's a task all in itself. And I feel a beautiful journey, as you said, that can bring so much transformation and a feeling of coming home. So if we can take that piece, this showcase, this mask that we're putting on, and we can look behind that, beyond that, and that takes some courage. Sometimes can be a little bit scary to start with that, especially too when it comes to safety. But if we can do that, there's a whole other world inside that we can connect with and become part of. It's always there, but we don't maybe allow it all the time. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's very beautiful and such a wonderful and amazing journey to go on. And I feel even to go on with someone else, for example, as you as a mentor or coach or guide, to really help us come back to that alignment. So share a little bit more about what you had pointed to as far as the safety part of this, because I feel that holds us back a lot of the times, can be a bit of a challenge. So how do you work with that?
Absolutely. And I'll share a short story. And for some of you that have seen the summit recording, You may be familiar with some of this, but when it comes to safety, what's truly important for our nervous system is to not be in that flight or fight mode. We've all heard about that, right? You know what happens when your heart rate increases. You may feel a bit of a pressure in your chest as you get ready for your interview, or as you get ready to go into that big meeting, or maybe it is something that you think people will not appreciate. Maybe you broke a vase and your partner really loved it, and she's going to come into the room and you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? And what I've realized on my path, and this is lived experience through and through, is that I was never taught as a young boy in my family, in my culture, both in Romania where I was born and in Canada when I moved when I was 17, how to actually just use my breath or use the tools that are easily available to me, that are not external of me, to calm myself down. And I'm sure many of you listening, if you're listening to this podcast, you've likely done a lot of work. And for that, I applaud you. And at the same time, what I find is that we tend to complicate or overcomplicate things in this world, because if it's not looking like it's hard work, then it's not valued. So another thing I grew up with, especially in an environment like a communist Romania, where to get ahead, you had to really work really hard, or at least that was the mentality. I grew up with that idea that if it looks easy, it must not be good. And as I went through this work, I started to realize the question kept popping up in my sessions with myself and friends and clients and whatnot, where the question was so backwards to me, but it came up, is what if this could be easy? What would it look like? And one thing I've realized on my path as well is that when you ask a question and you truly listen, meaning that you just ask the question and sit quietly, the answer will come. And the answer will not come externally of you. The answer will come internally. Now, obviously, if you're listening to music, kids are yelling in the background, you are about to jump on a work call, and you have a million things going in your mind, you can listen all you want, but you're not going to hear, because the noise is so big that we can't hear our own body talking to us or our own selves talking to us. So bringing it full circle now to a mini story I'll share. I'm not going to go into the full details, but essentially in a matter of half an hour, you and I talked about this, Petra, I cured my phobia of cold water, which I didn't even know was a phobia or a fear until after the fact. And the first step in doing that had to be to create a safety in my environment. And I was in a hot tub surrounded by strangers talking loudly in a beautiful setting outdoors. So one could argue that I was already fairly safe. But to me and my body, I learned this later, when I was in a crowded space with people talking loudly and some in languages I didn't understand, there was no safety because of how I grew up, the stories that were passed down to me and whatnot. So what I was invited in that moment through spirit, through my practice, was to quiet down the noise external of me and go within. And to do, I used my breath. And in the summit recording, for those of you that will get to see that or have seen it, we did a mini exercise where what we did is we took some deep breaths in, exhaled, and we literally brought down our anxiety levels from whatever number it was for you back then to a 0 or a 1. And what it allowed, from a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest. And the goal there is that if you take yourself out of the flight or fight mode, you calm your nervous system down, make it feel safe, all of a sudden, you'll start noticing things that before were covered by the noise. Maybe you'll feel a pain in your body. Maybe you'll feel a tingling sensation, a hot or cold sensation. There's honestly dozens and dozens of sensations you can feel. And it's very easy for us. I know for me, it was so easy to ignore those. Because it's, oh, I just have a bit of a back pain, I'm going to go pop a pill, right? Oh, I have a bit of a sharp pain in my heart. Oh my God, no, I hope it's not a stroke or something. Okay, let me do something. And then you increase your anxiety. All of a sudden, you drown the message that might have wanted to come through. And once I started to bring myself in that peaceful, calm state, I allowed myself to listen, to have a conversation with whatever part of you that came up in that. In my case, it was a pain around my heart. And that allowed then for me to see a vision of essentially something that happened when I was 1 year old, where my mother fell in cold water with me, submerged all the way down herself with me above the water. And then I was transferred, essentially, if you think in an energetic perspective, her fears. for her life, for my life, for the cold water, for whatever was happening there. So all the stories that she had accumulated in her life around that, plus what happened in the moment, was transferred over to this baby that had no other ideas. Okay, this is in my field now, it's happening. And in that moment, what I had seen, or felt rather, was all of that was actually not mine. So whenever I would try to get into a cold plunge, then I would want to get up and do something with cold water because I was in a hot tub, right? So I would want to go to a cold plunge. I would freeze, literally. Yes, the weather was freezing, but I would freeze. I would be like, no, I can't do that. And I thought that was just me. And you know how you go through life and you do things, and sometimes you don't do things, and you're like, that's just who I am. And I know I did it a lot in my life. And sometimes I still catch myself as, oh, that's just who I am. And the question is it who you are, or is it who you learned to be to feel safe? And what if it could be easy to release what's no longer serving you, so then you can find safety in just being yourself, not being someone else, just to please a crowd or a person or individual?
What a powerful question. And I'm sounding into that right now. As you said that, my body goes, oh, there's a few things that aren't you, but you're telling yourself, but it's just your story that you learned. So that's a powerful reframe, I think, of how we often look at our lives and our stories. And our stories very often become our identities, right? So they, as we take them on and we make them bigger, we internalize them. And as you said, then they are us. Oh, this is just who I am. So my story has become my identity. And at that point, we also then have a choice. And that might be in the subconscious to start with, right? But eventually, if we can become aware of it, we come to a point where we can choose to work on that story. And if it no longer serves us, to release it. So I feel that is super, super empowering, what you just shared there.
There's a couple of things that come up as you share that, Petra, and thank you for reflecting back some of those things as well. And there's actually three things that were coming up at the same time that want to come through. And the first one, I'm always reminded in meditation, and it's something that at times I still forget, is this idea that whatever you set out to do, let's say you begin a new day, or you go into a project, you go into a meeting, or I came into this podcast recording with you, is to set an intention. And when you set the intention, what you're essentially doing, of course, from a spiritual perspective, there's the whole connection piece. We can go down that path, but let's take it from more of a human perspective, the ego, or perhaps science or neuroscience, is essentially you're setting your focus on whatever it is now that you put your intention to. And there was a study done a long time ago. There was this long stretch of road somewhere in the US where there were no trees on the road. It was very barren, but they had telephone poles every 100 meters or a few hundred feet, right? And you probably know the story. I see you nodding there, Petra, and maybe many do as well. But the idea was that when there was an accident on that road, a surprisingly high amount of people were hitting the telephone poles when there was nothing around them, so they could avoid that. And what they have found is exactly what I just mentioned, is what you put your focus on, don't hit the pole, don't hit the pole, even though you're saying yourself don't, it doesn't matter to your few thousand old year brain. It's going to be like, oh, you're looking at the pole, I'm going to go for it. And the same thing happens with intention. If my intention is to, let's say I woke up today, the sun is shining, it's still cold in Canada, I was out on the homestead with the chickens and the dogs, and I was like, man, it's such a beautiful day. My intention is just to show up purely from my heart, not take a step back, but calm down and show up peacefully. Now, they may seem trivial, because to me it seemed trivial at the beginning, but what I've realized it does over time is it allows you to look for those opportunities subconsciously, not consciously, because remember, subconscious patterns drive behavior before conscious thought. So subconsciously, you're going to be looking for things to pick up that align with whatever it is that you're focusing on, which was the intention in my case. So maybe, like in my case, I noticed the blades of grass look greener today than they did a few days ago, which brought me a sense of peace and joy because spring is coming. Again, it's pretty late in Canada, but that's how it goes here, and things of that nature. So that was the first thing. Let's set up an intention. Now, why do I mention intention? Because when we do the work that I do, it's actually very easy and simple, but we start with that breath work, that grounding, and intention setting. And it's interesting because when I start working with a client, they usually come to me and say, okay, I want to work on my money story, or I want to work on my fear of public speaking and the stories around it. They have a very specific goal in mind, which is amazing because we all want to have a goal and at least we know we can go after it. But what tends to happen, Petra, especially even in the first session, but usually after the first one, is that they realize that they can come into doing something like this without any predefined notion of what they should be working on. Because here's what happens. Your body, which is connected, of course, to spirit, to God, to whatever you believe in, is the vessel that's being used by your higher self, whoever, to communicate with you. So it knows already what you need to work on. And sometimes when we try to force an outcome, oh, I need to work on this now, we don't realize that there are layers that we have to go through first to allow ourselves to work on it. My journey started many moons ago through an ayahuasca ceremony, or I should say retreat. It was ayahuasca in St. Pedro. And I vividly remember I was in a beautiful circle with about 25 other attendees. And some had amazing experiences and some had no experiences at all. And I was somewhere in the middle. I had a great experience. And I would hear the people that had no experience, and I could hear the disappointments. Like I felt nothing. I see all these amazing things and nothing happened for me. And then a few days passed and we went to the second ceremony. And all of a sudden, 70% of those people that didn't feel anything, they had the best experience ever. And the few that didn't, a few more days passed, next ceremony, they too had it. And what I came to understand back then, and what the shamans were explaining, and it wasn't very clear to me back then, was that you have to, again, like we talked about the clutter, we have to remove some things before we can get to the problem that you are interested in. But intention allows us to be very clear. Okay, you know what? I want to work on this. Now, 9 out of 10 times when I go into a session now with myself or others, the intention, when I guide you in, you set your intention is to yourself. I don't need to know it. And it's almost 9 out of 10 times, it's going to be show me or help me release what I need to release in this moment. And I just had a couple of sessions over the last few days here, and every single one said this. I can't believe that came up. I wasn't even thinking that something I had a story attached to. And I was like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I'll get to the third thing that came up, but I'll pause because I know I talked a lot, so I would love to hear your take on it or any thoughts coming up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the things that come up for me in this is just how amazing our subconscious mind actually is, and how little we often know how to work with it and how to integrate all of that back into our bodies. I feel when I work with people, there's a huge disconnect between all of that. Very often I see that there's not that integration, and that's where a lot of the challenges come from. So, of course, with the subconscious, often we're not aware. But when we give it that room to breathe, that space to just show us what needs to be taken care of, what needs to be accessed, it actually does that. And whether it does it in the first ceremony or the second or the third, it does do it if we just have a bit of that space to listen in, to let the clutter come out, and to create that space for that to come. So for me, as you were describing that, I can so relate to that, because very often I sat there and I was like, why is nothing coming up for me? Why is my subconscious not talking to me? But that's the beauty of it. It sometimes takes a bit of space and time to let that come forward.
I love that you mentioned that, Petra, because what happens in the moment, and I've done it so many times myself, is that you keep asking yourself, what's going on? You start playing a loop in your head, right? The story's coming in to support what's happening now. And what you're really doing is you're adding more noise. So the more noise you add, the less you're going to hear and the less you're going to see or feel what's happening. And the work is still going to get done below the surface, but you may not be privy to it until at some point later on. Hindsight is 2020, they say, and it's so spot on, especially in this type of work. And going back to the work I get to do right now, what I love more and more every time I do a session is that I literally, if you could look at what I do and say, well, Constantin, all he's doing is holding space and guiding. And that's actually true, because you're doing the work. Because you come in with a level of trust, and then you have to trust yourself that whatever is coming up is for you, is of you, and that's it. And the more people get to do that, the easier this work becomes. So when we go back to the question, what if it could be easy? It is actually very easy once we get out of our own way. And it's not I have the answers or you have the answers. We guide people to find their own answers. And that's the best part. And I remember when I started doing this work, my own stories had me looking for validation at every step of the way. Oh, tell me what your intention is. Tell me this and this. Walk me through what you're feeling. And I realized that what I was doing with that, I was doing for myself and others, is like I was getting in my own way. I was creating the noise, right? Now, in the sessions, be it in group sessions, one-on-one sessions, retreats, doesn't really matter, is the idea of I bring myself down to a zero on the scale of anxiety that we talked about, and then allow myself to be a vessel to channel through. So I may say a word every 10 minutes, I may say a word every minute, depends on how it goes, but we guide the process along. And the amount of work that someone can get done in just 10 minutes, half an hour, however long the session they want to have, is just unbelievable. I've had people talk about how they did more in one session like this than they've done in years of therapy, traditional therapy. Not saying that therapy is bad in any form. I've done much myself, but it's also not for everyone, right? And there's different stages to each person's journey. So maybe you do have to go through therapy to go through some things to allow you to trust yourself to some level, to be able to do some of these healing modalities that perhaps are not as mainstream as they ought to be.
Yeah. And therapy, I feel also, it reaches a different dimension of our healing journey than we can reach with some of the work that you're describing. I feel that there are different layers and different mental, emotional, physical, energetic. There are many different layers to these healing journeys. And of course, our stories, right? Sometimes those stories come to us in a physical way, and sometimes they get stuck in an emotional, mental way. So it makes sense to work on different dimensions with these techniques and sessions that you're describing. Whereas talk therapy is super great when it's on a mental, like a logical level. We can talk it out, it can be very helpful for resolution, but it can still be stuck on many different other layers and in different places. So I can see why your work would be so important there.
Because to me, I look at mindset coaching being very similar. I had expensive mindset coaches throughout my life. I was a mindset coach both when I was a professional poker player and poker coach, and also in the corporate world and with my clients back in the day. And mindset work is beautiful because it can help you push through certain blocks, but it doesn't tackle what I call the root cause. And you and I have talked about this at length right now. The root cause is the stories. And it's a great segue into something that I was talking to a client yesterday, and we were doing a bit of work on this around fears that come up, right? If what was shown to me in meditation is that you as a soul listening right now, you came into this life just pure love, 100% pure love. But from the moment you're conceived and as you grow up in the womb, you're now exposed to all these energies around you, your mother, your father, the environment you're in. And there's a lot of science to show now that even as you grow up in the womb, you're unfortunately or fortunately, depending how you want to look at it, you're absorbing everything that's going on. And then you're a baby, you need help, you need to grow up in this world. And again, you're a sponge, at least for the first 7 years of your life. So you accumulate mom's stories, dad's stories, grandma, grandpa, teachers, society, culture, religion, all of it, right? And you make your own versions of those stories. Sometimes it's the same story, sometimes it's a bit different. And then what? That's who you act as, right? Like the stories that guide your life. Like you're having a bunch of different glasses on your face and you're seeing the world through those lenses. And now looking back, I'm realizing that everything I have accomplished in life, all the success I've had, was in big part due to, of course, the light I brought into this world as this soul, but also all these stories that have guided me to navigate this human experience. But what if all of us have a purpose or a reason to be here? And then the question I ask myself is, if I use someone else's stories, like my mother's around cold water as an example, how likely am I to realize the purpose, the reason I'm here for? Because I'm using someone else's tool to get my job done. It's likely not going to happen. Now, that's not good, bad, or indifferent. In the spiritual world, I believe strongly that there is no good, bad, or indifferent. right? Outside of this universe that we work in, there just is. But here we have those lenses that we look through. Okay, this is good, this is bad, based on this criteria, and something that's good for me may be bad for you, and vice versa. Coming back to this work, I'm sitting with my client yesterday, and we're talking about selling homes and how he accepted an offer on a house that was a bit under market. It was a very lowball offer, and everyone was saying you need to get more money, you should push. And he just accepted the offer. And we discussed, asked questions, and allowed him to share. And it was around, he mentioned fears that were coming up. And then I said, okay, what type of fear coming up, right? And fear of the house not selling if you reject the offer, not being stuck with it for much longer because you have the other property, things like that, normal things that come up. And I asked a question that I often find myself asking myself is, okay, is that the true fear that's come up? Or is it just something that potentially is a decoy? Meaning that, is there something more below the surface? And what I have found on my journey is that if you can spot a fear, or if you can spot a symptom of a fear, it's likely not the true fear, because we know fear is an illusion. And if something is an illusion and you can see through it, it will dissipate. So if I were to be a fear, let's say, I would want to make sure that nobody sees me, because the moment they see me, the magic is over. I'm done for. So what I've realized on my path is that talking about imposter syndrome, or fear of failure, fear of rejection, to me, those are very, I wouldn't say superficial because they're real, they impact people, but they're superficial in the sense they're not actually the true fear at the surface that people have to deal with. And they're powered by stories. But what happens if you look below the surface? You'll almost always be able to go back to, I should say always, not almost, always go back to a story that supported the fear. So I had a fear of public speaking for a very long time. And when I say public speaking, I'm talking about like being on a podcast like this with yourself, and on the other hundreds of podcasts I've been on, and my own show, and all these things. It was a long time ago. But what I realized is there were stories that were passed down to me through my family. And back then I didn't have the methods I'm using right now, the clear activation. What I did is I did therapy, of course. I had coaches. So I was fighting through it, and that worked for that particular reason until I was able to find a modality like this and clear it out fully. But as I was talking to him here, we then realized that the second level of the fear had to do with a story from family, a specific family member. And what our own stories allow us to do in a moment is to say, oh, this is it. And we now get stuck. We got one layer deeper. We're going to be like, this is it. There's no other thing. And then what I invite you to do in listening right now is, if you look at the fear and say, okay, let's go a level deeper, ask the question again. Is this the last level of it? Is there more under it? And what I have found every single time, Petra, it goes down to a level of enoughness, meaning that either you don't feel enough, you don't feel like you have enough, like you do enough, like you matter enough, some form of enoughness. And for most of us, that's impossible to see until you reduce that noise, right? You make it safe for yourself to see and feel, and realize that I'm doing this because I actually don't feel like I'm good enough, because there are stories from my childhood when I was told, or I was made to feel like I'm not good enough. Or there was a story that was passed down from my grandmother because she grew up like that and she inherited those stories and she passed them down to me. So if we know that everything ties back to enoughness, then the next questions that we ask become to me, very simple. What if I am enough? What if I have enough? How would it change everything else that happens?
Yeah. And that, of course, comes back to taking some of the clutter off of the top of that, looking inside. And then what if that could be easy? What if being enough could be easy for us?
Yeah.
I love that perspective.
What if you're just enough the way you are? And I've struggled with weight all my life. And I say I struggle because I've been up and down. I used to be fit when playing soccer and football, and then gained weight because I enjoy food and all the stories that come with that. And the more I go down the path to understand, okay, what's driving all of this? Why am I having a hard time losing weight or keeping it off or staying fit or being like all these people that you see? It dawned on me that Obviously, there's stories that are doing this, but there are also stories that say, okay, if you're not a certain physical body shape or size, you're not good enough for whatever this world created. And sure, there's a lot of science to say, of course, you want to be at a healthy BMI because of your body and how it evolved, and to keep it safe and healthy. That's great. But we also know that society has created these stories where if you're not a size 2, if you're a woman, or whatever size is for man, then you're seen as less than, right? And that gets passed down directly or indirectly, very often indirectly, to be honest with you, to you from everyone in your lineage, everyone in your environment. And again, it goes back to, if you look at every aspect of your life, I can guarantee you don't need to find the real story, you just can see some of the stories. Because in this work, what I have found, Petra, as well, is like, when I go into a session, let's say it's about your money story, you don't need to come in knowing anything. As long as you come in at least with some level of trust in yourself and the practitioner, your body, spirit will guide you to find your answer. The same way it guided me to see a memory from when I was 1 year old in the arms of my mother that she fell in the water. Like, how is it even possible? One may ask. You're storing all of it. Of course, it's possible for you to access that if you're open, if you trust, and if you're safe, or feel safe.
If you have that safety. Yeah. Even internal safety. Absolutely. Yeah. Constantin, before we wrap up, can you give us just a really brief overview, because you've mentioned the clear activation. So what does the clear stand for when you're working with your clients or on yourself also? Can you give us a brief look at what that stands for?
Thank you. I appreciate it. So CLEAR is an acronym. And I chose the CLEAR acronym, or it was given to me, I should say, through Spirit, because what we're doing is we're clearing the noise. We're clearing the clutter away. And there are 5 steps that it's not that they have to be done in a specific order. They have to look exactly like that, but they guide you through the process. And the first letter, the C, stands for connection, right? It's about connecting with your inner self, with Gaia, as I like to say, with Mother Earth, with Spirit. And that's through the breath, right? We connect to the earth, we connect to Spirit, we connect to ourselves, to our higher selves. And what the beauty of this is, it doesn't matter what religion you are, what belief system you have. I work with people that were completely non-spiritual and people that are very spiritual, and it works for everyone the same, as long as you allow some level of trust in yourself and the process. And as we connect, what tends to happen, and again, we did this as a bit of a demo in the summit, and we then did the broader experience. But what happens after you connect, you start to realize that there are certain things that want to talk to you, and one will be more noisy, quote unquote, than others. And this is the L, which stands for locate. So let's locate which part of our body has a message for us. And again, even if you're a big skeptic, what I love about this work is that when you go through this once, you'll be left asking question, how does this even work? Like, why this is not supposed to work this way? It does. That's the magic. So we locate that part of our body. And there's a practice in therapy called internal family medicine, right? There's a few others that work a very similar way. Hypnotherapy does as well, where essentially, once you locate this part of your subconscious or your body, whatever you want to call it, you can literally have a conversation with it the same way I have one with you right now. And you can ask questions. And the next letter, so we had the C, we had the L, so connect, locate, and we have the E, which is empathize. What I have realized in this work and what I was guided through is that when the empathize, so after you locate and you start feeling and visualizing what's happening, it's the idea of empathizing on what's being seen. You don't relieve the trauma. In the hundreds of sessions I've done like this and hundreds, thousands of people that have been through this, not one has had to relieve a trauma. Like sometimes, unfortunately, in other modalities, you have to go through the fire to get out of the fire. And many people don't want to do that because you may have, unfortunately, physical trauma, sexual trauma, things that no one wants to relieve or should relieve ever. So the idea is to observe whatever is being shown to you. And you're guided to do this, by the way, at this stage. It's not something that you have to force yourself. It will come naturally as you're being guided with music, with my voice or another practitioner's voice or whatever happens. And we empathize with what's being shown. But here's the beauty. Most people without knowing much more about this or doing other modalities, they feel like, oh, they have to empathize with the person that did something to them or the people that did something to them. Oh, my mom passed me this story, so I have to empathize with her. Sure, that's a big aspect of it. But the bigger one, I would say, if there is such a thing as a bigger one, is to empathize with yourself. Meaning that with the version of you that was stuck in that memories, seeing them for who they are, because what happens often when we go through something traumatic or we have stories, we blame ourselves. So you blame yourself for putting yourself in the situation where you got bullied because you did A, B, or C. But I had many of those examples in my life. And of course, if you get to something more traumatic like sexual abuse or physical abuse of other nature or anything else, you're like, oh, I should have not gone on that vacation where I put myself in that scenario. Then you blame yourself and you can empathize with the person with yourself. That's it. And you start to see the movie from a different lens, like a third party. You're watching TV is, okay, I can empathize with that. And what it does in this section is that it allows you to almost detach yourself from the story and realize that was never your story. It was passed down to you by someone else. Because when you get to see it from their eyes, when you get to see it from the eyes of the you that experienced that and the third party, when you get to feel into it without reliving anything, you realize that was never you to begin with. And what tends to happen subconsciously and at the ego level, if you like to say that, is that if you believe something is yours, this was my experience, this is something that I did to myself, you're going to hold on to it. You're never going to release it. So in this step, we employ something called memory reconsolidation. It's something that, again, in different therapeutic methods, they use this, which is the idea that your memories become malleable. So in other words, you access the memory, you're now seeing it from a different perspective. And you may turn something that you thought was negative into something that's neutral or positive. Again, I don't want us to focus too much on good or bad, because in the end, it doesn't really matter, because it's very subjective and it's very dependent on the situation you're in, the time of life you're in. But by making the memory malleable, changing it a bit, it allows you to, again, detach yourself from it, which then brings us to the next step. So we have the C, the L, the E, the A now, this is one of my favorite steps. All of them are amazing, but it's the alchemize step. So essentially we alchemize the pain, the story, all of it, and we release it. So it's the alchemize and release step. And what we do in this step is that everyone is different here, but there's some form of visualization of this story. You can think of it as a physical object that exists in your field and is attached to you in some way or form. It could be through a cord, it could be attached to your body, whatever you visualize. Very often it ends up being some form of a cord or cords. And it's the idea of how can we dissolve, release those cords, so we release the story from our field. One of the challenges I've personally had with other modalities, especially mindset coaching, the things of that nature, is that we may tackle a memory, we may tackle a version of ourselves, but we never release our ties to it, which means that if our life circumstances ever change, which they will, because life happens, you're back to square one or some version of square one. So in this stage, what we do is we release this from our field. So if this no longer exists in our field, it has no more hold over us. It has no more way of coming back as it was, because we released it. And when you release something from your field, you're creating a bit of a vacuum in space. And we know that in space, whatever in this universe that we live in, anything that's a vacuum gets filled up really quickly. So if we stopped at the A stage, we alchemize, we release, and we stop there, that vacuum can be filled up by something that's not necessarily in your highest good. You may go back to your work, you may go back to something else, and something triggers and gets released. So what comes next is the last step. So we did the C, the L, the E, the A, and now we're back to R, which to me is this idea of recalibration, reconnection. You called it integration earlier, right? It has different names that you can go by, but it's the idea of let's not rush the process. In the alchemize and release stage, we release with love, with gratitude, with forgiveness to that version of us that held on to this for so long, and all the people that were part of the story, right? So in my example of the story of my mother with the cold water, I found forgiveness for that baby version of me that took on the story without realizing what he was doing. And then that allowed me to find forgiveness for my mother for passing it on to me because she didn't know what to do with it. And what you realize going through this journey is that many of the stories that someone passes down to you have been passed on to them. And there's a belief in many traditions, but let's say a shamanic tradition, which is some of my background, that the reason we pass down these stories, one of the reasons I should say, is that we don't know what to do with them. So we hope that the next iteration of us, right? So our younger kids or pupils, like it could be outside of your family, they may find a solution. And if they do, they'll find it for everyone. That's why I'm working on rebranding my entire thing to Jōrni Back to One, because in the end, all we're doing was returning back to this one version of God, Spirit, us, whatever it is, right? And by doing it for yourself, you just do it for your entire lineage and everyone else that you get to impact in this life. So in this art, the recalibration, the integration step, the reconnection step, we literally just sit in the calm, in the peace, in the love. So we fill that void space, or that space that we created, with just more love and peace. So what that does, imagine a scenario in which, let's say, your true self is one big piece, maybe it's 1/20th of what your whole is, and the other 19 pieces of you are these big stories, these big clutter pieces. You remove one piece, now you have 18 clutter pieces, and you have one as you. Guess what? All of them have more space now, including your light, which means now you allow more of your light to come through. Sure, some of your darkness may come through more as well, but that's another opportunity for you to continue releasing. And it becomes a process that you don't need someone like me to do. Once you trust in yourself, you learn how to do this, you can do it on your own. And 9 out of 10 times you'll do it on your own, and 1 out of 10 is like, no, this is difficult, I'm going to go to a practitioner. And that's what I find myself doing as well. I hope that answers your question, Petra.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking us through that. And I feel this is such a unique part of the work that you do is, of course, this method or this process that you apply and let people find their way in that. I'm feeling like our listeners might be really curious on how they can connect with you and find out more about this and potentially even work with you on their own challenges and stories. So how can our listeners find you, and what kind of programs and services do you offer?
Yeah, no, thank you, Petra, so much for the question. And yes, if you're interested, you can reach out to me at Constantin, there's no E in my name, at unleashthyself.com. So that's my previous brand, but that's an email that many people know. So I'm sticking to that for now. And of course, if you look up Jōrni Back to One, you'll be able to find my work online as well. Either a podcast is going to start soon again, and the music I create to support my work, and everything else, additional information. You can contact me. And the way I work with people is I do occasionally take on one-on-one clients. I like to work in groups as well, because the collective is very powerful. And if we all come together with an intention to release what's no longer serving us, it could be a specific release, like, okay, let's work on releasing anything that's holding us back from succeeding in public speaking or podcasting or professional life, whatever it is, then there's a bit more power in that, right? So there's one-on-one work, group work, masterminds, retreats. There's different ways. And what I found is that everyone is at a different stage of their journey, and they respond better to one modality versus the other. And the great thing is that you know the answer, right? And if you feel a pull in one of those directions, it may not be now, it may be later, you'll know it.
Yeah, it's already all inside of us. So we can tap into that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those resources. And we, of course, will be linking to all of Constantin's resources, links, and offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there on how you can connect with him and how you can continue this journey that you may have just started in this podcast. You found out about something that might change your perspective and bring you another step into your own journey. So yeah, follow that call, because it's already all there and align with that. And on that note, thank you, Constantin, for joining me today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your own journey with our listeners and with myself. I am so grateful that you spent this time with us, and so grateful that you were here today with me.
Thank you so much, Petra. And I would say, in conclusion, really quick, if there's one thing you take away from this, it's coming in strong for me to share, is that you don't need anything external of you. You don't need anything more to become the version of you that you've always known you can be, and you should be, or you ought to be. You've got all the answers. So it's time to come within, bring that calm, bring that peace in, and witness the miracles unfolding in your life. It's magical.
It's so beautifully said. And we'll leave our listeners with that. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today. Thank you, Constantin. And take care of yourselves, everyone, and be well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.